Alrighty. Thank you guys for joining us on this week's episode. And I'm super excited. I know I say that all the time, but I'm genuinely extra excited this week because our guest today is Belinda Wearne, who is the CEO and creator of Yoni Elixir and the Enlightenment in the Bedroom experiences and events. And she will tell us about what those things are in just a moment. But I know Belinda as B because we have been we met through a mutual friend many years ago. I'm not sure whether it would be 5 years or 6 years, but she is just an amazing woman. She's a mother. She's an entrepreneur. She's a light worker. And I think what we're going to talk about today will be empowering, enlightening, and exciting. So we're going to dive straight in. Belinda, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Marina. I love being here with you.
Okay, so we're going to dive straight in. What the heck is a Yoni Elixir?
A Yoni Elixir. Maybe what the heck is a Yoni to start with, just in case.
Yes.
Might go there. So I created this product, Yoni Elixir, because I had a certain understanding of who I was as a woman and what my body was about as a woman, what my relationships were about as a woman, until a certain point. And it's usually when things start falling apart, when you come to the conclusions that something needs to change. And through my processes, what I realized for myself was that I really needed to get more deeply in touch with myself as a sexual woman and become okay with that. And it's not just because of relationships. This was my personal relationship with myself as a woman, with my body. And so I started down, we're going straight in here. I started down the path of a self-pleasure practice. So really getting back in touch with what filled me in the ways of pleasure. And in doing so, I realized that this, it couldn't just be me who didn't understand this fully about herself. And so I created a product called Yoni Elixir to encourage other women to say, look, it's okay. It's okay to connect with yourself. It's okay to be a sexual woman. It's okay to have pleasure that you give to yourself. Yes. And so Yoni is a much more sacred term for what we would usually term a vagina. But Yoni encompasses the entire reproductive space, as well as the vagina and the vulva and all of the bits, but it's much more devotional and sacred because it means your sacred temple.
So Yoni, so it's a sacred term that means it's a term that means your sacred temple. Mm-hmm. What is it when you say it's? What is the origin? Where is that from? Is that
It's a Sanskrit term.
I thought so. Okay. Yeah. But I didn't want to speak from a place of assumption. Beautiful. Okay. So that's fantastic. And I love that you mention it means the whole part, because, there are a lot of women who get very angry when we just reference the term vagina, knowing that isn't actually, it's kind of like calling the arm the elbow. So how do you feel about that? Do you think it's really important that we come up with a new term, or do you think it's less important, but rather that we just understand it? Like, how do you relate to this? Stop calling it the vagina. It's not a vagina. And yet maybe vagina is better than, these other names that we come up with. So yeah, what's your thoughts on that, given that this is your space?
I don't get particularly angry about it. I feel like as long as we're calling it something that's, reasonably reverential. So if we're using terminology that are a little bit more crass, then we're perhaps not really giving ourselves and our bodies, and particularly this area, the honor that it deserves for what it does for us. I do anatomically, just calling it vagina is incorrect, because that's just the internal hollow space. It doesn't encompass the vulva, it doesn't encompass the clitoris, it doesn't encompass the labia, any of the pieces. Mm-hmm. Whereas Yoni to me encompasses the whole lot. But it's also because the term vagina it actually means sheath for your sword. So
wow, Belinda, I did not know that.
Didn't you?
I did not know that. Pause, rewind, stop the press. Vagina means sheath for your sword. Yeah. Holy macaroni.
So what does that then say to you?
Yes, is it that the purpose of this space is
like, what's it for? It's immediately got a definition of its purpose.
Well, I love that as the creator of Enlightenment in the bedroom, you have enlightened me today. And I'm sure there are some listeners who did not know that that was the definition. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, as someone, who speaks and teaches in different spaces, linguistics are really important. And I feel that as a society, we undervalue, and people can go, oh, you're being pernickety, but we build our world with our words. And when we don't know, I'm fascinated by etymology, and I'll often go and look at, where something comes from. And it's sometimes really shocking. That's just like, my mind is blown. I did not know that. So for sure, for me personally, that really does change how and the language I use around vagina. But I also wanted to say, because, and just for those of you who are listening, if you haven't yet cottoned on these few minutes into this podcast, if you're not comfortable with this language, one, I encourage you to keep listening. Two, if you've got young ears and you don't want them to hear around, then I'm definitely going to encourage you to pop your headphones in and continue with us. But this is just my preamble to let you know that if any of this language is triggering you, it's going to get a little worse with what I'm about to say. So just make sure you take care of that pause. So I wanted to speak to, the fact that there are, I think it's 220, or I could be making up the number and I apologize, but the point of this story is to indicate that we have a lot of negative words associated with the female genitalia and our sexuality, about 220, in contrast to, I believe, around about 20 for men that are negative in nature or derogative, and I know that, Mama G has done Pussy the Reclamation, which was kind of a book that got a lot of public attention because of its reclaiming of the word. But there are a lot of frames and words that we use around our sexuality as a woman that isn't empowering. And so for me today, I think what's blown my mind is to hear vagina, which I've always known is not anatomically correct, but I thought was at least relevant. And it's the phrase I use with my girls instead of other words, so they can just anatomically say vagina and whatnot. They're still young, obviously. What you've just shared with me, knowing now the etymology, really shifts how I even feel about that word. So yeah, language is important. I'm really grateful, and I'm a bit stunned that I didn't know that. But thank you. So, okay, so the yoni is the sacred space of your womanhood as a whole, as you're describing it, and elixir. Can you just explain? It's a self-pleasure oil, correct? That's how you would describe it. So, what is the purpose of me having this yoni elixir?
So for one, it's a permission piece. So it's an incredibly beautiful.
It's beautiful
oil. It looks amazing. And it's not something you're necessarily embarrassed for someone to see sitting on your bedside table, but if you have a tube of lube that's a $20 or even $10 thing that is built on chemicals, then it's not something you necessarily feel proud of either, So what I wanted to create was a sense of pride in the fact that I willingly give myself pleasure as a woman. So it's an oil, and it's an oil that's infused with herbs that are really beautiful for women. There's some that will calm your nervous system. There's some that will activate your womb. There's some that will encourage pleasure. And the base of the oils is really luxurious, and I actually have friends who use it on their face because it's actually that good for your skin. So it's also really, really healthy for you, as opposed to a lot of the other products out there that are, I really feel like we're at a position now in our society where we do a lot of things for our health. So you would know this with your gyms. There's so many more people doing yoga. We're doing meditation. We're doing all these things for our physical. We're eating really well. But then when it comes to things like body products, sometimes we'll just kind of push to the edge and we'll use a foundation that's made with chemicals, or we'll use shampoos that are still coated in things. And I've always been much more on I'd prefer a natural thing side. And so when it comes to lubricants, and I know there are some out there that a lot of people will find cause irritation. And particularly when they use it internally. We don't necessarily need things internally most of the time. So the oil I created is 1, as a permission piece, 2, as a health piece, and 3, as a reverential piece. Because I really want us to not just honor ourselves in the ways of putting healthy things into our body, but what we use with our bodies as being, I deserve better than just a mass-produced rubbishy thing. And particularly in my yoni area, I mean, this is what makes me, like, women are so magical. I didn't even know how magical I was as a woman. You know, our bodies are incredible, what they do for us and what they do every day, not just with the whole process of birthing children.
Yes, look, I mean, what you've just shared is so many things come to mind, but just to be really tangible for the listeners. So Yoni Elixir is not something you ingest. It is a liquid oil. It comes in a beautiful golden box. It really is beautiful. You've done an amazing job creating a very luxury, reverence tool, I think, for women. But then you would utilize it with your fingers. I want people, I feel like sometimes people don't get something because they don't know what to do with it. You know, it's almost like for me in fitness, people go, oh, I saw those sliding discs, but I don't know what to do with it. And then they see, you know, a video and they go, oh, I get it now. So is this the kind of, I suppose I don't want this to be an uncomfortable, or, you know, when I thought about talking to you today, I thought I really wanted to talk in the ways. Do you ever have that experience in high school where you maybe went on holidays and you came back and everyone seemed to know something you didn't know, like whether it was about periods or tampons, or suddenly they were talking about something to do with sex, and, you know, you're at that age and you're like, I don't get it. And you don't want to ask because you don't want everyone to now know that you don't get it. Yeah. So I want us to have this conversation so that no one needs to leave going, I didn't get it. So is this a masturbation partnership? Is this something you can use with masturbation? Can you use it with partners? I know you've said you can use it on your face. It's obviously very good for the body, which I love, because I, many, many years ago, gave up using any other kind of lubricants other than natural oil-based products that I could eat if I wanted to, or that my body can ingest. So I love that you've actually formulated it, though, knowing the science of the parasympathetic nervous system, the pleasure centers. And the parasympathetic nervous system is such an important one, isn't it? Because it's relaxing and opening us to receiving. I want to shelve receiving, though, and I want to keep going on this question. Firstly, tangible. Yep. I get the product. If I'm going to do a self-pleasure practice, because this is the other thing, I have a lot of friends that teach self-pleasure, and then they say it's not just masturbation, but I then think people go, well, what is it? Because no one's really talking in plain English.
Okay.
But yeah, can you tell us straight up what I can do with Yoni Elixir that is a self-pleasure practice?
Plain English. Anything you can do with a lubricant, you can do with Yoni Elixir. It's just an oil base. So a self-pleasure practice might not involve masturbation.
Okay, beautiful.
Practice might just be about something that brings pleasure to your body. It could even be something that brings pleasure to your taste buds. It could be bringing pleasure, wherever pleasure comes to you through the senses, bring that in. The space you would use the oil would be when you're touching your body. So you could be doing breast massage, which I encourage everyone to do every day. You could be doing yoni massage as well. Mostly you would use it externally as opposed to internally. So you might need a small amount, but externally to encourage your own body's natural lubricants to happen. So, I mean, you can use it for any kind of massage. You could be like, I love my hands being massaged. You know? Any kind of massage you can use this product for. But essentially the intention of it is to be used for a purpose of self-pleasure, which can involve masturbation. Yes, you can use it with your partners. Absolutely. Men love it. So one of the bigger pieces that it does, especially when working with your nervous system, is it helps you to access your heart more. And I feel like as much as that might sound a little bit less tangible as well, usually we're having better sex and better intimacy with our partners if we're feeling open in our hearts.
100%.
So we're feeling much more connected, and that's one of the benefits as well.
And, you know, Belinda, I like that you're much more subtle than me, but here comes Sledgehammer Marina. But when you talk about, you know, we don't need to use it internally because we have that natural ability ourselves. So it's an external. So this then to me is talking about the very real need for women, because we're anatomically built differently to men, for foreplay. and even inside a relationship, because a lot of our listeners will be single and they'll understand self-pleasure. And then I think a lot of our listeners will be in relationships and go, well, I have a good sex life with my partner. It's good. So for them, they might be going, well, what's the purpose of this? And I'm imagining one of the main benefits would be creating with your partner a new way of intimately relating that isn't necessarily just going, straight for penetration, but instead, giving him an ability to have reverence for your yoni, and for you to equally have that. And in doing that, both benefit from the effects of taking the time to create the sensory awareness, because any woman listening knows what I'm talking about, that there is definitely a much higher degree of wetness and therefore receptivity. That's what your body is doing when we're more receptive, because we're I know everyone hates that word moist, but whatever, we're wetter inside because we've given ourselves time to go, do I want to receive? Am I ready to receive? Yes, yes, yes. And we build that anticipation. So I think that for partners, this is as valuable as a self-pleasure tool, right? Because it really brings back that piece of, I'm not just here, and I'm going back full circle to what you said at the beginning, to be a sheath for your sword. I equally get to have pleasure in this.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of things in there as well. One of them being that when you use a typical lubricant, you will often think to yourself, because I'm using this, I don't require to be ready. Like this is just going to replace my natural, juices. And so you can jump straight to the penetration by using lubricant. The idea of this lubricant is the opposite. Essentially, you use it as the massage, you use it as the reverence piece, like you said, which then allows your body to open much more naturally, which means sex is going to be not only longer, but it's going to be much more enjoyable for everybody. And, a man is not usually trying to have sex with a woman for their own pleasure. Most men actually want their women to enjoy pleasure. And so it's up to us in a lot of ways to actually understand our pleasure enough, be as comfortable as we can with our own pleasure, that we can be present during the process of foreplay. Because I think oftentimes women will desire to skip foreplay as well, yes, because it puts them into a more vulnerable position. So that's one piece. The other piece I wanted to speak to there as well is that there's this other myth out there, and it's not in every world, but in some worlds there's still this belief that a tighter vagina is better for the man. And this is not the case. It's not better for anyone, because when we're talking about even Kegel exercises, and some might have heard of yoni eggs and using yoni eggs, but oftentimes they think that the intention is to tighten in this area. And when you think of tightening something, you're usually thinking of tension. And so if you think about having tight shoulders, for instance, that's not a comfortable thing. And so if you've tightened yourself in your labia or in your vagina or any of the, in the perineum, if there's tension held here, it's much, much, much harder for your body to naturally open and to enjoy pleasure as well. And so that's the other benefit of slowing down and having a self-pleasure practice with Yoni Elixir as well, is to find all those spaces of tension so that you can release them, so that there's actually much more pleasure available.
So this could be a really great alternative, or, used as in the same way as having a warm bath and relax. A lot of women, especially ones I work with, that have to go from that, high productivity, high energy focus, which is a masculine drive. I mean, we all have masculine and feminine. So when, this is not about men and women. Inside of a woman is the masculine and feminine energy. So, and then coming home, and sometimes the reason, we're not ready to receive a masculine male is because we're still in our own masculinity. And we're like, I don't have time for that. I've got to put the kids to bed. I've got to do the things. And yet almost all of my clients that I speak to that will relate to intimacy in that way, like, oh, Marina, sometimes I just don't feel like I have time for it. I'm not in the mood. I've got too many things going on in my head. I work with a lot of clients who can't orgasm because they're running their to-do list while they're having sex. And so what they've had to learn to do is to transition out of and put that down and not make it wrong. Yes, my masculine energy served me today. I was very productive between, the hours of 9 and 5. And now that I'm home, And one of the things that can do it is that trigger or that anchor, right, of that physical, experiential, somatic, bringing us back into our body, like the bath and, rubbing oil on your body. And so really what you're saying is this could be something that maybe before your partner and you connect, you go and connect with yourself. And in that softening, then, the feminine energy is the softness and the openness. It's that container, isn't it, of that creates the space, that invites in the intimacy. But I agree with you. We are looking at an epidemic inside this corona pandemic, but we're looking at an epidemic of women who are resistant to the vulnerability of surrender. And perhaps that's the greatest block to us building much deeper connections in the intimacy we're craving. And something like Yoni Elixir becomes a tangible tool, which I like, because a lot of talk is really cheap and people are like, yes, I need to be in my feminine. Well, you know what? Go and buy an oil and try it, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. And maybe initially you put it off for a week, right? But maybe after the first time you try it and then you connect with your partner, the magic of that difference will be enough for you to go, oh, maybe I need to prioritize this. And whether there's a partner involved or not, like, you still get to enjoy stepping into that other aspect of yourself. Is that really where you feel the Yoni Elixir kind of becomes a piece of this modern day life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't want to relate too much to things like the slow food movement and all of that sort of thing, but we're in such a fast-paced everything that we forget the origins of what things are about. We forget what sex is really about. Sex isn't just about a quick release, and maybe sometimes it is, but the intention is to connect with the other person, right? So being able to connect with yourself, like you're saying, have that moment, have that time. Like, I keep a bottle in my shower actually, so that in the mornings I can just really connect in with my body before I go out into my day. But one of the biggest things that happened for me when I first started a self-pleasure practice, and the reason that led me to this as well, is that I had been that person who had the to-do list in my head all the time, like just constant. And so I was constantly thinking, and even when I was masturbating, in my younger years, I would have to be thinking of something. I'd have to be fantasizing something. I'd have to be creating something in my mind that took away, it actually took away from the pleasure enough that I didn't feel the shame that was attached to the pleasure as well.
Oh, that's powerful, B. Yeah.
And so the process of this time when I was dedicated to doing a self-pleasure practice and being with myself, that was a sudden realization I had. Just one time I was like, oh, I suddenly realized that I wasn't thinking anymore. So I was actually really present in my body. I could actually feel all of the things. And it was such a different way of life after that. And that was what, really, because I knew the logic of having a practice and what it might achieve before that point. But once I hit that point, I was like, this needs to be
the way of being,
reality of every woman.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I think you're right. I know for myself, my unfolding came through feeling. And I like to say the feeling is the healing. We hear that a lot, right? And I think that women and men, but, today we're talking particularly to women, is that we actually, often when I do the work I do and I ask people how they're feeling, I will get a whole series of different things that are anything but feeling. Like, they're not feelings, they're not actually dropped in their body. They're an observation of their life through the construct of the conscious mind. And as a result, cannot be present. And I think when we drop into the body for the purpose of just being in the feeling, that's how we can access, this often talked about present moment in a real way. And I think you're right, the slowing down, that's definitely something for me as a very yang energy, high, movement-based person. I'm always in my body, but often fast. So yin yoga, as an example, for people listening, it doesn't always have to be, in the sexual realm, but we can benefit. Yin yoga cracked me open multiple times, again and again. And we store in our body, don't we, Belinda, like emotions and traumas. And anytime that we can connect physically in a deeper, not like, oh, I got to exercise to burn some calories kind of way, that doesn't count, whether it's to music and movement, or whether it's to opening and expanding, or whether it's for sheer joy and bliss, there is always a healing, I think, that comes from the feeling of the somatic sensations that cannot be done through talk therapy, that cannot be experienced through any other way. Like, this is one of the many and very important tools, I think, that we can access to, so if you're someone who's like, I don't want to talk to people about my stuff, great, you don't have to. Try something that can move that emotion or that thing somatically, which means, through the body. So intimacy, what does that mean to you?
It's an excellent question. That's usually a question I'm asking everyone else.
Yeah.
Because it's really important to know your own definition of intimacy. For me, it's very much about a communication between myself and another person or another thing. So what I talk about I teach around the foundations of intimacy, and one of these aspects of this program is that we need to be intimate with every aspect of our lives. So my definition is quite broad in that the intimacy for me, it's what's going on in that space between myself and that other thing. And it might be another person, like what's my relationship with a partner, with a friend, with family members, or it might be my relationship to the world, or it might be my relationship to unseen forces. There's so many different elements of ways that we can be intimate, and it's really just about what am I communicating with another thing or person, and what am I receiving from that other thing, and what's happening in that space in between. And so when I begin, like the first parts that we look at in this foundations of intimacy is not just ways that you learned how to love and what you did or did not receive as love, like what your definitions of what make you feel like you're connected in that way, but what actually are the like I've got 11 types of intimacy that I go through, and with those 11 different types, it's really fascinating to see how people start to register, oh, I do actually have all this intimacy in my life, but I just thought it needed to come from there in that format. But there's so many different other ways. So
yeah, I'd like to unpack this further if you don't mind, Belinda, because I think that this is something I hear a lot from, my tribe is, and not just inside of that, traditional male-female dynamic of relationship, but whether it's with girlfriends, or whether it's between parent and child, or whether it's between same sex, or, irrespective, I often hear, I just want more intimacy. I want to feel more connection. We've got a great relationship. We don't fight, or we do talk, or we do the things together, but there's still this craving, and you can feel it when they talk about it, of like actual intimacy. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, I know 11 is a lot, and we can link to all of your things so people can go and learn more about this, but if you can share with us a little bit more about the 5 loves that you talked about, and maybe the 11, or just touch on that a little bit more, because I'd love you to give maybe some tips for people to maybe acknowledge where they maybe do have intimacy and don't realize it, or how they can activate more intimacy so they can meet that need.
Yeah. So the 5 core needs of love, basically this is much of what we do and don't desire is designed when we're young, like very young. And it's based on the ways that we did and didn't receive love, generally from our primary caregivers, which is usually our parents. And so a lot of people will take that into their sexual desires as well. So oftentimes they will desire things that they thought were taboo, or they will desire things that they think will give them whatever void they have grown up with will be filled by this thing. So that's oftentimes will show up as their erotic fantasies.
Yes.
But a lot of this is just simply based on the needs for love and intimacy. So there's 5 main ones, and I didn't determine these were in a book called How to Be an Adult in Relationships by David Richo. One of them is attention. And so when you receive attention that is wholesome, like you can receive attention in certain ways that don't inspire love in you. You know, you might get a lot of attention from your parents, but it might all be negative attention, or it might not be about really being present with you as a child. You know, you see a lot of people on their phones these days, so they might actually be near their children, but not necessarily present with them. So the first one is attention. Then you have acceptance, and so acceptance of who we are as a human being. So oftentimes, even when we're born, we know that we're expected to be something that isn't necessarily who we are meant to be. So attention, acceptance, appreciation. Appreciation is, it's a lot of those, it gives more depth to acceptance. And so it's admiration, it's like delighting in you, it's prizing you, it's an acknowledgement and a validation, essentially, of, you know, I really appreciate having you in my life, and I think you're fantastic. Affection comes through in a lot of different ways as well, and it might be something like, you know, it might be affectionate touch, it might be just any kind of kindness that is offered to you as affection. And so, you know, remembering that these things you may have felt like you did receive from your parents and primary caregivers, or you may have felt like you didn't really receive. And you can go a lot deeper in these. Like, I can give you some tools for your listeners to go a lot deeper. And the final one is allowing. And allowing is knowing that it's safe to behave in ways that are authentic to who you are. So you're allowed to be exactly who you are. So those are the, I found those to be really powerful things to look at.
Definitely.
Yeah, in really.
It's actually fascinating hearing that, and that's not a book that I've read. In the book I'm writing about self-sovereignty, you've mentioned 5. There are 7. 4 of the 5 you mentioned are words I use about self-sovereignty. So that in the steps of reclaiming it. So that is super interesting, and I'm not surprised by that, because the way that we relate to others is very often the mirror within ourselves, right? And I know D. Martini says so frequently that our voids drive our values. So I love what you mentioned, that very often what we don't receive is therefore what we crave. And definitely I have noticed with my clients, and even with myself, that the sexual fantasies or the way I want things to show up in the bedroom are often because they're not allowed, or they've been disowned, or they've been left dormant. And that was a big part of my personal awakening was, you know, I share this openly, so I don't mind sharing it here, but up until the end of my marriage, which was 17 years from high school, you know, to 2 children with my husband, sex was kind of a thing we did. We both got to have an orgasm. It was good. It was kind of a, let's get it done, you know, and then if I needed to get to sleep at night and I couldn't, I would masturbate. Like, it was kind of a thing, because I was so heavily masculinely driven. And it wasn't until the end of that marriage and the ability, or the explosion of, like we said earlier, of the identity and the breakdown being the breakthrough, you know, the opportunity to see where things aren't working, that I got to actually unfold into the softening and unfold into other aspects of myself, and realize that actually I don't want to be in control in my life. And so therefore noticing, just even in the bedroom, how things that I liked and ways I wanted it also shifted and expanded, or just bloomed, and my body started to do very different things, and when my mind wasn't controlling how it needed to look. So, and a lot of what was preconditioned there was from childhood. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that it would be a valuable lesson for everyone listening to really, around this idea of intimacy, and I just referenced it on a sexual level, but it doesn't have to be, obviously, just really going, yeah, well, what is it that I like and don't like, and why might that be the case? Just with curiosity, why might that be the case? And where am I looking to get that fix or that fill? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important reasons, one of the reasons that I believe this to be important, is that oftentimes in every other aspect of our lives, we're saying what we want, and we're saying what we think we need, but then we'll often get there, or we'll work really, really hard to get that thing. We'll find it, and we'll get the thing that we want, only to find out that we still didn't get the thing that we want.
Yes.
You know, because what we actually wanted wasn't that material thing or that object or that person. It was something that we're skipping over within ourselves, or we so far removed from that we don't even recognize anymore. And
Yeah.
so for me, going back to these voids of childhood of love, when to start with, we require our caregivers to give that to us, and then we go seeking for someone else to give that to us. But it's not until we can actually understand it and give that to ourselves that it can finally be filled. And so oftentimes that might even change our desires sexually, you know, things like that might shift and change. And I think that's another piece as to why some relationships break down, is because as we become more aware, we realize that the thing we were looking for, it's never going to fit that hole within, because we didn't know what the hole was. So
yes. Is it really bad that I think it's funny we're talking about holes? Am I that childish?
No,
yes, it didn't fit the hole. And then actually I was writing down a thing to ask you, and I started laughing at my own. I was like, what resistance comes at you when you talk about Yoni and stuff? And then I was like, oh, pardon the pun about the cum. Anyway, I'm just basically a child. So talk to me about intimacy and a couple of these 11, you know, even if you're happy to share, just what does that mean when you say that there are these different types of intimacy?
So, well, one of the first ones I like to start with, because I always didn't quite understand why it was a sense of humor that was so attractive to me in another person. But to me, that comes back down to intellectual intimacy. So I'm a Gemini, for starters. So for me, there's a lot of mental activity a lot of the time, and I just love banter. I love being able to connect in this space. And so when you do talk about intimacy, most people will either think straight to sexual intimacy, or they'll go straight to emotional intimacy. But really what they're looking for is just another way to have this communication, this energy flow between themselves and another. And it's the one that inspires them, or maybe they get it from different places. And so intellectual intimacy really is a spark for me.
Me too.
Attraction, it brings me a sense of connection. Like, you get me. Like, if you get my jokes, if you get my wit, if you get the way that I speak, then you understand me, and I feel much more seen and understood. And that's one of those cravings of intimacy as well, isn't it? Is that sense of feeling seen and understood. And then you might have physical intimacy as well. That's another one. And physical intimacy is it's not the same as sexual intimacy. This could be just, you know, you see even the boys on the footy field patting each other on the bum or on the back. There's like a connection in that's like, good on you, mate. Like, I'm with you and I'm here for you. And so it can be really bro-like, or it could be something like a massage, or just a gentle touch on the shoulder to your child, or a, you know, little, you know, you touch your cheek and smile at your kid, they're going to go, you know, they feel really seen and loved. So, and then you could have something like experiential intimacy, which is when you share experiences with someone. You might go through something that's really fun, or something that's really quite challenging, or something that's really, you know, really activates the emotions in you. And when you think about that saying is, oh, you had to be there.
Yes.
The kind of thing when you can't explain the experience to someone else, but whoever, the person that was there with you through that, you've got this bond with this connection. And so it's like, there's this specific way that you can see each other, or something that you know about each other, that, you know. So that's just 3. There's 8 more. So
wow, I love that. I actually want to know the other 8, because as you're listening, I'm also feeling as if people will be good fits for us in different realms. Is that true? So I can think of people that I have deep intellectual intimacy, and it's literally like magic. And then I can think of, when you said experiential, I have like a male friend, non-sexual partner, just like a male friend, fully platonic, but we go on adventures together and we travel, and we also have intellectual intimacy. Like we have that same sense of humor, and so time together. And I'm wondering if maybe the more intimacies you match with someone, generally perhaps the more bonded, or the greater the affinity. And I don't know if this is true, Belinda, so I'm curious. you know, I've got some girls in my life who are currently in the dating scene, and they're, you know, on the Bumbles and the different apps. I can't keep up with them all, but, you know, they're doing the banter and they're like, oh, he's got to have a good banter. And then they might meet them and they're like, or they might kiss them or something else happens. And they're just like, there's nothing technically wrong, but it's just not a physical. So when you're saying about the physical intimacy, I know it can be platonic, but sometimes that can be a discord, right? With a potential partner that for some reason, energetically, your two beings just don't seem to fire off. Would that be true to say?
Yeah. I think there's it kind of goes off track a little bit, but my understanding of this is it comes much more back to the nervous system, like the energetic connections. So when you're looking for that physical response and that sexual desire, a lot of that, especially if it's immediate, it comes back to the ways that your nervous systems and your energy fields are interacting with each other. So there's a lot of, like when you were speaking earlier about your emotions get retained in your body.
Yes.
Oftentimes what we don't realize that we're matching with these people on a physical level is past experiences and emotional attachments and wounding and things like that as well. So this is a little bit outside of the conversation of intimacy and types of intimacy, but definitely coming back to what you were saying about the more intimacies we have with someone, the more likely we are to immediately bond and for that to last longer.
Yes, and I think too, you know, so much of this conversation would eventually have to come back to all of the beliefs and the stories and the rules we have about our conditioning as it pertains to intimacy, whether that, particularly if today we focus on sexual intimacy. I'm okay with that because we're talking in this space, and I think it's helpful for us to have that conversation. But some people, for instance, won't actually even allow their bodies to feel excited or you know, have those physical responses until there's a heart connection or until there's those other connections. Whereas some people will feel one before the other just because of they believe sex is just sex, and other people believe sex is an extension of connection. And that kind of comes back to, again, our conditioning as children, what we've experienced in our relationships and all of those things, correct? Like it really is a very unique, I imagine, fingerprint, how we relate to intimacy, how we relate to sexuality. And I think it's a really exciting journey for every individual to really dive into for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I do believe that we each have kind of a blueprint, and I think it's really important to point out that none of it's wrong either.
No.
Like because you approach something or you have a particular type of intimacy that sparks you more or first doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just we do have that unique individual response. You know, we're individual beings, and a lot of this discussion is really about like becoming okay with who you are as an individual being and your unique ways of desiring and craving and connecting, and then bring it into this space where it's all overlapping and connecting in this bigger arena. And there's so many layers, there's so many enmeshments and entanglements and ways and dynamics that everything moves between us all. So it's not like it's a wrong thing that it's not easy all the time.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
so
for
much.
sure. And then I'm curious because I'm sure you would, well, I know you do lots of work with women in this space, but what do you think is the most common or a few of the common resistances we have to the concepts of self-pleasure, whether that is a more kind of masturbation based self-pleasure or just even a touching of our bodies and intimacy with our bodies? What do you feel is or the top three, even if they're like, oh, there's a couple resistances? Like, what are the stories that people might be running who are listening, who might go,
Well, one is the fact that we are still to some degree trained. Remember what we said about the word vagina, that it's a sheath for the sword, right? There's a lot of ways that we are trained through movies and things like that, that our value is in whether or not we're sexually attractive. So I think there's a big piece in that where we grow up with a lot of shame around our beauty or our sexual attractiveness. And we either try really hard to be more sexually attractive, or we shut that down because we're terrified of actually being connected. I think there's also body issues that we have based on the same thing. Like a lot of us aren't proud of our bodies. You know, there's so much perfection required to fit that mold that a lot of us aren't proud, and so therefore we don't have the gratitude for what we've been given in our bodies. So we, you know, and it's something that we need to cultivate, that we can actually cultivate through these kinds of practices.
Yes.
And then I think there's all the ways in which we feel like we have been hurt throughout our lives, like we feel like we haven't been loved, or we haven't been appreciated or adored, all of those 5-7 things.
The rejections, the betrayals. Yeah. I think those 3 are so common. And as you say them, like I can just feel my system sighing with a empathy of, you know, myself in that piece, as well as the sisterhood of women on this planet today, because we are just doing a number on ourselves, and there is a rise, and you can feel it and you can see it. And what I want to speak to for my sisters out there at the moment, when we're starting to move towards this body love movement, you know, if you're aware of that on social media, which is so needed, because if there isn't representation, there isn't inclusion, and there can't be relatability. So we need to be seeing real bodies in the media. I couldn't agree more with that. And by real bodies, I mean, we need to see the rolls of skin that we all have, and we need to see the stretch marks that we all have, and we need to see the cellulite that we all have. Or, you know, pardon?
And age.
And age, yeah, age, exactly. And the lines and the things. And I think it's also okay for women to still want to exercise. So for me, inside of the fitness genre, I'm noticing that it's such a strong push to self-love that if you say anything about wanting to enhance your well-being as it pertains to your physical representation, there's almost a backlash on you at the moment as to how dare you not be happy with your body as it is. They're almost shaming you for not loving yourself, but the purpose of the self-love movement is to love yourself. It's just that for me, it's that paradox that we go through, this pendulum of like, we're so intense on ourselves and then we're so over here. And it's like, can we just accept that we're all of that and find a midline together? And I think one thing that came to me as you were speaking to, Belinda, is I have a lot of women that I've worked with, and I'm not sure if this has shown up for you, but in addition to those 3, I think as women, we have to really acknowledge, even though we live in an era where we feel very equal, and you know, where we see, you know, the future is female, and we're very much I mean, look at the Hollywood movies at the moment. I can't think of one in the last whenever where it wasn't a female lead. Like, it's such a strong swing. Yet we are living on the shoulders of our foremothers. And as a result, we have to acknowledge that it is only in recent times, and even still in some countries on this planet today, women are given, and we were given with a dowry. And it makes sense to me that vagina means sheath for sword. Like, there is a part of us as women, and I've worked with women who really do think that their bodies are here for the pleasure of men. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that's a piece with the self-pleasure. It's like, but is this mine to enjoy? Because I thought it was for him to praise, or, you know, and if it's not opposite sex relationships, excuse my focus on that. But you know what I'm saying? There's a very systemic energy that, you know, do they find as in the everyone, which now includes the media, women and men, but will he find me attractive? Will he like my vagina? Will I do it right? You know, and I've worked with a lot of women that realized that sex for them wasn't enjoyable because it wasn't for them at all. It really was for his pleasure. You know, did he enjoy it? And what I know to be true, and I love that you mentioned it earlier, is that actually men love women loving the act and the pleasure and watching them orgasm. The men get, like, you know, they would probably sometimes, I'm sure, prefer that to their own crescendo of orgasmic joy, to watch the fact that they got to co-create that and bring that into a woman's body. I know for sure my partner speaks to that frequently, you know, that's a great joy for him to watch me roll through the ecstasy myself. And so I wish, you know, we hear this a lot, and I've seen something recently. It was on a TV show where a young boy said to the young girl, I wish you could see yourself as I see you. You know, and I think as women, we see other women in such a way. And yet when we turn that mirror back to ourselves, we don't bring the same reverence and the same grace of viewing ourselves. And it's there is so much work to be done in every one of those areas we just spoke about, you know. the shame of the stigma, that good girls don't have sex, for instance, and from an act of love, I think parents taught us that, right? So that we didn't go and get pregnant early and all the things, and it's just conditioned from generation to generation. But what do you think we need to do for the women listening who might be mothers, like you and I are? What can we do to really do our part for ourselves, but also for the collective, to start to really shift this in some bigger ways so that we can all enjoy more pleasure?
Yeah, I really feel like, and it doesn't have to specifically be a self-pleasure practice, but getting back into our feeling bodies,
yes,
I think is the very most powerful singular thing that you could potentially do. Like really understanding what it is you feel in any given moment, and stop shaming yourself for feeling. We're generally, as women, a little more sensitive in the feeling space, and it's not the thing that is applauded the most in this world. The productivity and what you create, what's tangibly able to be handed over as I did this kind of, gets much more accolade comparative to just the ability to feel your feelings. And I think there are so many ways that we avoid feeling our feelings. We don't give ourselves time. We don't give ourselves the space to be in our bodies. And pleasure isn't the only way to be in your bodies. It's just the most pleasurable way.
True.
Really allowing, like, if you can't do that for yourself immediately, give space to your friends to feel. Like really understand, ask them the question, how do you feel? And allow them to talk to what they actually genuinely feel in their body. Appreciate that in them. And then you can start to appreciate it more in yourself if you need to work in that direction.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because essentially the message there, what I'm saying on the bigger spectrum, because here's Marina thinking, how do we save the world? And you're really just very aptly putting it like the wisest of the wise, which is be the change you want to see. If we want to see women opening to more pleasure, then make the time and the effort to explore opening to pleasure yourself. And I know as a mum, it is monkey see, monkey do. If they see me just do, and they don't see me being playful or, taking time to just luxuriate in my womanhood, and take time with my partner or whatever it is, then they too will learn that that's how it's meant to be. Exactly. So,
and really being intimate in all the details of those things as well. I mean, why do you do your exercise? Is it because of the well-being, or is it because you're not perfect enough? Why do you put on makeup? Is it because you love just glorifying yourself, or is it because you're not good enough? Why do you get your hair done? Why do you do all these self-care things? You might think you're setting a great example for the others out there, but it's not a great example if you're doing it from the wrong space.
Intentionality, right?
Yeah, and everything. Have those conversations. That's the other big piece for me, is that's what Enlightenment in the Bedroom is about as well. That events are there for us to have these conversations, to open up the floor for, people to come and give some expert ideas and insights and advice, much like you're doing here today. But open up yourself to more conversation about this kind of thing.
I would love to talk a bit more about that, Belinda, because I think these events that you've created are very unique. We have a lot of, we have so many events running these days. Like there's lots of networking events and business events and, entrepreneur this and parenting events. And yet I feel that what you've created is really unique. And I have been to Enlightenment in the Bedroom. And for anyone who hasn't, definitely find out if there's one running near you, and even if it's not super close, make the effort to go when we're able to after COVID. Because I think the benefit, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but listening to a podcast where you've got two women talking about pussies and vaginas and moistness, there's an allness about that and an intimacy. Yes. And there's a difference when you come into a room and you sit in the space, the container of let's just get curious about what enlightenment can look like in all of the different forms. And it is definitely, I've been, and it's not at all always lectures on sex or, bedroom activities. It's about all of the factors. It's all the parts that touch all of the parts, because life is life, right? And I think that there's a lot to be gained from people coming and hearing those conversations in a way that, one, normalizes it, destigmatizes it, and also just makes it fun. Like, it's really, everyone you have is a great speaker and an expert in their space. You always learn something, and you walk away kind of going, not only do I now know something different, but I know that isn't anything to be shamed about or to be hidden away, because I was just in a room where lots of people were talking about it and listening to it. It kind of, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Not normalizes, but
no, I think normalizing is kind of a good word.
Okay.
Because oftentimes that is one of the things that women will mention later, is like, oh, thank goodness I'm normal.
Is that why you created these events? Tell us about why you created them, and specifically what you think are the benefits of, those kind of events.
So I originally created the events because I had created Yoni Elixir, and it became more and more apparent to me that there was so much that I didn't know. And I had a lot of friends who were working in the fields of Tantra or sacred sexuality in some respect, or they were a sex and relationships coach. And they had these fantastic workshops and or retreats. But I'm like, oh, I don't think I know the right words to be
Yes.
part of the Tantra crowd. Like, I don't have the right lingo, or maybe I don't have the right kind of style. I'm a little bit less hippie, a little bit more mainstream in a lot of ways. And it felt like a lot of those things were a little bit out of my league, or maybe they were just a big leap to go from where I just want to know some of the basics, want to know some of the questions. Like you were saying earlier, there's so many pieces that you forget that you already know when you teach some of these workshops. And so there's so many places that you can go to, and you're like, how stupid am I going to look if I ask this question right now? And then there's also all these amazing workshops and circles, but you step into them, and oftentimes you find yourself reasonably confronted by the fact that, oh, I've got to talk about myself now, or I've got to answer all these questions. So what I really wanted to create was a platform for re-education, essentially, of sex for adults who are actually doing sex, compared to the education that you get at high school, which is basically how
Don't
much
have sex.
disease, and you're better off not having sex.
So, yeah. Well, you know what, actually, Belinda, can I just pause you there? And I don't mean to interrupt, but I think what you just said is absolutely, it's actually never dawned on me, but it's so true, because I often say, in the nutrition space, which I'm super passionate about, and, have spent years becoming more and more educated because of my own issues there, that we all eat, and yet we're never taught to eat. Right? Yeah. Like we all eat and we never taught to eat. And yet what I'm just hearing from you as you shared that was, we all came through the act of sex. Like, not one of us is on this planet without sex having occurred. And hopefully we're all having sex, or we're not, but wish we were, or we're not and wish we weren't, but kind of think there's something wrong with us for not. So we're all across the spectrum. And yet, where did we all learn to do it well, in a way that maybe would be more pleasuring to both parties, or whoever's in the room, whatever kind of sexual act you like, whatever. Or even in a healthy, do you know what I mean? Like, where? So that's right. Like, getting to come into a room and actually, as an adult, without any kind of belittling, get to join a conversation around that. That's so valuable.
Well, the where is, as kids, it's just all speculation and the blind leading the blind. As adults, it's often something like porn. And porn there is some now that's a bit more healthily focused, but porn as a general rule is all that part where you skip the pleasure and you go straight to the penetration, and it's not about really learning about our bodies.
And actually, Belinda, I was watching an interesting documentary not that long ago that was saying that that's actually where children now are most learning about sex, because of the rise of the internet. That is unbelievably concerning to me. And it went quite in depth and did studies where girls were watching, and then they were asked what they wanted their first intimate relationship to be like. And I actually don't know if the podcast is ready to hear what I was going to say, but they're quite graphic some might say degrading acts, potentially. I mean, some women might really like it, but these were young girls saying that's what they wanted their first sexual relationship, sexual interaction to be like. And then one asked why. They were like, well, because I think that's what he wants, was the answer, because that's what they had learned from the porn. And I mean, so much of me as a mother of two girls just suddenly gets like, I can just feel, that inner protective phoenix rising to be like, what now? We need to be doing work in that space as well. But certainly for adults, I agree. And the other thing that I really love about Enlightenment in the bedroom, and I feel you and I actually sit similarly in this space for a lot of women, is there's a bridge too, right? Because a lot of us are locked down. We're taught a lot of conditioning around sex. There's a lot of stigma, and maybe we're caught up in a busy, high functioning but mainstream kind of world. And then there's this, we look across and there's people who maybe live in communes and have tantric nights and have full moon ceremonies where they rub period blood on their face, and they're saying this is what womanhood looks like and this is how you embody your feminine, for instance. And then you might be over here going, well, that's all good and great, but no thanks. I think I'll stay locked in my masculine. Cheers, catch you later. Because it's just such an extreme representation that where's the midpoint, and where's the alternative options, and where's the conversation to actually go, well, that's one option, but it's not the only option. And this is where the conversation becomes so critical, because if it's an either or extreme solution, we're kind of screwed, aren't we? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And there's all sorts of conditioning on both ends of that spectrum too. And I think oftentimes when we have considered the idea of liberation in regards to sex, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm liberated because I just have sex with anyone, wherever and whenever, and just because I feel like it. And I think that's just another variation on conditioning for a lot of people as well. It might be true for some people, but I think what we're looking for is a sense of freedom from the rules that tell us what is and isn't right for us.
Yes.
And the ways that we feel as a result of engaging in sex with people, sexual energy with other people. And so for some people, it might look like a Tantra community, which may or may not be based on sex as well. For other people, it might look like going to a nunnery to avoid sex altogether, but for the most of us, there's something in between that really just comes back for this desire to connect, this desire to really be beautifully connected and feel that pleasure and feel that joy in being with someone else.
Yeah. And I think when you said earlier about coming back to the heart, that's really it. Because if sleeping with multiple partners or at lib or having many partners at once, or, all of the different options that are available to people, if that's truly in alignment with your soul's expression and it comes from a place of love, then so be it. That's beautiful. And equally, if that is really just a ruse for intimacy avoidance and, then the same behavior, I suppose, just like every aspect of life, can really be a extension of very different codes within us, and therefore also very different alignments. And the question isn't what you're doing, is what you're doing expanding you, filling you up, and is it really giving you the experience effectively of what you want? And if it's not, then explore it. And that's what I love about what you give people.
That's basically what it's all about, is like exploring, well, what else is there out there that in this world that I've lived in, I haven't had experience with, or I haven't had access to, or I haven't had insight into, and how can I create a platform where all of this stuff is available in a very safe way, that you don't have to do anything, you don't have to ask anything, you don't have to answer any questions, you just come, you learn, you have fun, you can participate in the conversation if you like, and, you're usually going to end up leaving with your heart more open, your head more open, and wow, there's all these other things that I could potentially be doing. And that's the way, that's what potentially the internet could be being used for. All of these other pieces. But, again, it's not about glorifying any particular way of being over any other. It's not about denigrating any particular way of being, as necessarily bad, but it's like, if I don't know that there's options, I'm never
Yeah.
going to find out. Like if I only ever knew that there was strawberry, chocolate and vanilla ice cream,
Mm.
I would never have found the joy of pistachio. And
That would be a travesty, wouldn't it? It's just not okay. Don't talk about these horrible horrors that you're describing, Belinda. We need all of the flavors.
yeah.
Yes, but your point is super valid. All right. So as we wrap up, I want to ask you some quick fire questions. And the first one is, what within yourself right now are you currently working with, playing with, toiling with that excites you because it relates to your own personal expansion?
Oh, I kind of am going to talk about the same thing. Painting. I've got back into painting.
Yeah.
That's a personal expansion, but I'm expanding enlightenment in the bedroom, taking that around the country as soon as all of this, stay in your house lockdown kind of nonsense is over.
Yes, and everyone can go and check out, when and where those are for sure. And just with the painting, is that a form of self-pleasure too for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is the thing, like the self-pleasure practices are really just invitations to give yourself joy and expand aspects of yourself. Yeah, just coming back to that for people. And I imagine, if someone was to say, well, what's the benefits to self-pleasure, it would be, what would you say?
The benefits to self-pleasure is I think it's just a much more enjoyable way of being. Like we're so hard on ourselves so often, we're so critical of ourselves. Like you can't be being critical of yourself and creating pleasure for yourself at the same time.
Yeah, so it's the being piece, the feeling piece that you were talking about earlier. That's the real benefit. And I agree with you, the world needs more and more of that. And what would you list if you were going to kind of go, hey guys, just for me personally, it may or may not be beneficial for you, but this book or this experience or learning this skill or trying this thing, obviously self-pleasure was one. So let's put that as the number one. Start a self-pleasure practice. I think Belinda would definitely say, definitely get some Yoni Elixir and give it a try. But was there a book or an experience or something, a person, some advice, something that just like was a real pivot point that took you on a leap forward transformationally?
In speaking in the same context, the book Vagina was really good. Naomi Wolf. That was really educational for me in a lot of, but it covers a lot of the things that we were speaking about today. The other thing for me, and it's a very, very different topic, but a really pivotal thing for me was going into shadow work, like really looking at looking at where I have repressed or shut down aspects of myself.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful
Yeah.
process for me. So quite a different topic, but same.
Well, same topic, really. I feel like it's this. See, people often talk about shadow work. To me, shadow work is light work because shadow unfolds to light. Like it's the essential thing. Yeah. But yes, I agree, and especially around sexuality and vulnerability, because when we release the shame, we open the light. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Okay. Quick fire questions. What would be your number one recommendation to those listening to increase energy?
Increase energy, to learn how to access your sexual energy and move it through your body.
Okay. So you're talking about like a Kundalini or a Eros practice?
Not specific. I understand your own energy. Don't give it terminology. Don't ask someone else what it is.
So explore that for yourself.
Explore your own body. Understand where the energy sits, what you need to do to move it. Practice with breath, practice with movement, practice with self-touch.
Beautiful. And what would you recommend is the number one way to increase the experience of empowerment, feeling whole, safe, activated within oneself?
Shadow work, accessing the energy of what you've shut down within yourself, and emotional self-compassion. Yeah.
Beautiful, B, 100%. And then the last one in this quick fire is, what would be your number one tip to elevate and expand your expression into the world? So taking that feeling of empowerment and bringing it out, what would be your number one tip for people to really assist with that?
Again, shadow work. It's like where you are holding yourself back or where you're waiting for someone else to do something for you. That's where you need to move the next, and like just be brave for that 20 seconds, move through it.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. So the very last thing we're going to finish on is assuming the rest of this podcast got deleted. And all that's left is this one sentence that you're going to say. So this is in a way of kind of pre-framing a message in a bottle or an earwig into the people of the world. We get to give them one sentence that sums up something that you are like, guys, just remember this. Of all the things that I've learned in life, this is the most important. No pressure. I mean, it's only that important a sentence, you know. But just what would be the thing that you would say this?
You are not meant to be the same as everybody else. You're not here alone. And when you truly just love and give honor to the way that you really feel about something, then you can't go wrong. You might look back and it might seem wrong, but you didn't do it wrong. You're on path.
Yeah. So that there's your authenticity is what the world needs. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. We're not here to be the same, but we are not here alone. That's beautiful, B. Yeah. Okay. Well, unless there is anything else, was there anything else you really wanted to let the listeners know or to share today? How do you feel?
Well, if you want to know the rest of the 11.
Yes, I do. I want to know the other 8. So where do we get that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to send that through to you, and or I'll send you through a link where people can.
Yeah, we will put the link in the notes and people can go and grab so that we can learn the rest of the 11 intimacies, which I really loved because the intellectual, the physical, and the experiential, I was like, yes, what are the others? So yes, let's go and get that from Belinda. Thank you so much for that gift. That's very kind of you. And B, thank you so much for joining us today. You are such a light in the world. You do such beautiful things. Most of all, one of the things I love about you is the way that you give reverence to others. You are such a generous giver of praise, and it's something that I see in you a lot, and I really admire. Just there's so much that you do. I mean, you're a powerhouse in the creating and getting all your businesses up and being a mom, and yes, but something in particular that I noticed in you is your willingness to reflect the beauty of others out into the world. And so thank you for all that you do, and thank you for taking the time to share with us your wisdom and your knowledge. It's been just a privilege having you on. I love you so much.
You're so welcome, and I really, really appreciate being here. And yes, I won't spend the next 5 minutes giving you praise, but there's a lot to be given. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, thanks, gorgeous. All right, well, I'll see you soon. And for everybody listening, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.